Hello, in this video we will graph y equals to -2 cosine of 1 out of 6 x. The first thing we need to do is calculate the amplitude, which is the distance from the center line to the highest or the lowest point. And to calculate the amplitude, we can take the coefficient of cosine and take the absolute value of it. So absolute value of coefficient of cosine, which is -2, is equal to +2. So the amplitude is equal to 2. The next thing we need to calculate is the period, and the period is always calculated by taking 2 pi and dividing it by the coefficient of x, and in this case it's 1 out of 6. So in order to simplify this, we keep the first thing as is, so 2 pi. We change division into multiplication and flip the second fraction, so we get 6 out of 1. So period is equal to 2 times 6, which is 12 pi. Period is 12 pi. Then we need to calculate the phase shift, and it's always when the angle is equal to 0. So we need to take the angle of cosine, which is 1/6 of x, and solve it for 0. 6 is in denominator, so it's dividing x, and the inverse of dividing by 6 is to multiply by 6. And let's do the same thing to both sides. So 0 times 6. 6 and 6 will cancel on the left, and we get 1x is equal to 0 times 6, 0. So the phase shift is equal to 0. We also need to calculate quarter of the period, which is equal to period divided by 4. We had period was equal to 12 pi, and let's divide it by 4. 4 goes into 12 3 times, so quarter of the period is equal to 3 pi. So quarter of the period is 3 pi. Now we need to calculate 5 key x values, and the first x value is the phase shift, which is equal to 0. The next x value is equal to previous x value, x1, plus quarter of the period. So we get x2 is equal to x1 is 0 plus quarter of the period is 3 pi. So our second x is equal to 3 pi. The next x value, x3, is equal to x2 plus quarter of the period. So x3 is equal to 3 pi plus 3 pi, which is a quarter of the period, and we get x3 is equal to 3 plus 3 is 6 pi. So x3 is 6 pi. x4 can be calculated by taking x3 plus quarter of the period. So fourth x is equal to third x was 6 pi plus quarter of the period is 3 pi, and we get x4 is equal to 6 plus 3 is 9 pi. And the fifth x value can be calculated by taking fourth x value and adding quarter of the period to it. So x5 is equal to x4 was 9 pi plus quarter of the period is 3 pi, and we get x5 is equal to 9 plus 3, 12 pi. Now that we have our 5 key x values, let's start building a table. So first x was 0, then we had 3 pi, then we had 6 pi, then there was 9 pi, and the last point was 12 pi. And we need to substitute this into -2 cosine of 1 out of 6x. So let's substitute first x value into -2 cosine of 1 out of 6x. And instead of x, let's plug in 0. This will give us -2 times cosine of 1/6 times 0, 0. Cosine of 0 is 1, so we have -2 times 1, and the result gives us -2. But if you're not sure, we can always plug in -2 times cosine of 0 into a scientific calculator, and we get -2 as well. So -2 times cosine of 0 is -2. Once you get your starting point, you can use the pattern. Cosine begins at the coefficient, goes to 0, goes to the negative of the coefficient, so negative of -2 gives us +2. Then it goes back to 0 and the graph returns to the coefficient on the last step. But you can always substitute x values and calculate the y values using calculator. So the next y value could be calculated by taking -2 cosine of 1/6 and substituting 3 pi instead of x. 3 pi is out of 1. Both 6 and 3 can be divided by 3, so we can reduce by 3. 3 cancels out and 3 goes into 6 2 times. And we have -2 cosine of pi out of 2. So -2 times cosine of pi divided by 2. And this gives us 0. The next y value can be calculated by taking -2 cosine of 1/6 of x and substituting 6 pi instead of x. 6 pi is out of 1. 6 and 6 will cancel and we get -2 cosine of pi. So -2 cosine of pi is equal to 2. The next y value can be calculated by taking -2 cosine of 1/6 of x and substituting 9 pi in there. 9 pi is out of 1. Both 6 and 9 can be reduced by 3, so 6 divided by 3 is 2. 9 divided by 3 is 3. And we get -2 cosine of 3 pi out of 2. Notice how we keep on hitting the quadrantal angles because they are the only ones that matter for graphing sine and cosine. So -2 times cosine of 3 pi divided by 2 and we get a 0. And the last point can be calculated by taking -2 cosine of 1/6x and substituting 12 pi in there. 6 goes into 12 2 times and we get -2 cosine of 2 pi. So -2 times cosine of 2 pi is equal to -2. Once we have our x and y points, we can plot them on x and y axes. Our first x value was 0, then we had 3 pi, then we had 6 pi, then we had a 9 pi, and the cycle ended at 12 pi. And the graph goes between 2 and -2. So when x is 0, y is equal to -2. Cosine begins at the coefficient, then it goes towards the 0, goes to the opposite of the coefficient. So when x is 6 pi, y is 2. Then goes back to 0 at 9 pi. And it goes back to the coefficient of -2 at the end of the cycle of 12 pi. Once we have 5 points, we can connect them with a nice curve. Make sure they are rounded because it's very easy to make cosine look like a absolute value function. Because remember, it keeps on going in a wave. So this is our y equals to -2 cosine of 1/6x graph. That's all.